So the main question that prompted us to do the study, to which I'm going to talk, was because we were curious about to know how the muscle adapts to a severe energy deficit depending on the amount of physical activity. So if you are not doing any exercise, how the muscle responds when you are under a severe energy deficit. And if you are doing a little bit of exercise, how this is going to influence in the muscle adaptation. And what would happen if you do a lot of exercise? How will the muscle handle a situation where you are demanding a lot of exercise, and on top of this, you are in a very severe energy deficit? So, and the data I will present will try to explain what molecular mechanisms we have been seeing that are changing depending on the amount of exercise that you are doing. And where's the presenter? Thank you. This is the outline of my presentation. So that's what I was commenting. So when are humans in the severe energy deficit? So this is the situation that bariatric patients face. And during the first month after the surgery, they are burning around 100 to 150 grams of fat per day. And they don't eat that much neither. So probably they are having energy deficits of more than 1,000 kilocalories per day. But the severe energy deficit has been studied largely during many years. And one of the best studies on this field were done by Östersund in Norway. He was studying soldiers during ranch training camps, and they were having the subjects having exercise for a short period, 5-7 days, and then they were sleep deprived and doing exercise all day long, burning between 8,000 and 11,000 kilocalories and having an energy deficit that was not measured. During this type of intervention, what's happening is that the cortisol, that is a catabolic hormone, is increased during the first days of the intervention, and then when they stop doing the exercise, cortisol comes back to the normal level. And the problem is that when cortisol is increased, cortisol is binding to specific promoters in the DNA, and then it triggers a response that increases FOXO expression. This increases the atropine gene program, and as a consequence, protein degradation in the proteasome is activated, and also autophagy is activated, and then protein degradation occurs. In addition, glucocorticoids, they have a very wide anti-anabolic action. The corticosteroids, they are able to block IGF-1 signaling, AKT signaling. Also, the anabolic effect of amino acids are partly blocked by corticosteroids. So, in addition, during this type of situation of prolonged severe energy deficit, testosterone, that is a quite important anabolic hormone, is reduced during the period of severe energy deficit very much. And then when food intake is resumed and the energy balance is resumed, so then the normal levels of testosterone are reestablished. So we have a combination of reduced anabolism and increased catabolism. In this type of intervention, in soldiers simulating combat behind enemy lines with a lot of exercise and food restriction, IGF-1, that is another anabolic hormone, is also reduced. And the severe energy deficit subjects develop insulin resistance. And insulin is also an important anti-catabolic hormone. It also stimulates protein synthesis in the muscle. And this is a very nice study where an energy deficit of 4,000 kilocalories was induced by doing exercise and in two situations, with the subjects in energy deficit, 4,000 kilocalories, or energy balance. So the same amount of exercise, but energy balance. So then what happens is that when they are having energy deficit, that is this situation here, when they ingest a normal breakfast with 460 kilocalories, glucose concentration is increased very much. And when they are in energy balance, glucose is increased much less. And the same is happening with insulin, indicating that even if you do exercise, when you are in energy deficit, you have insulin resistance. One important endocrine change that is observed with severe energy deficit is a very marked reduction in leptin. This is after 72 hours of full fasting, no food at all. And this reduction in leptin is quite important to understand some of the adaptations to severe energy deficit. The reduction in leptin increases appetite, but it also is producing a reduction in thyrostimulant hormone and thyroid hormones, a reduction in sympathetic nerve activity and circulating catecholamines, and as a consequence, resting energy expenditure is reduced. And if you give a little bit of leptin to subjects that are under this situation, you can blunt the reduction, the attenuation of resting metabolic rate. So under this background, we wanted to create a situation where we will have humans having a very severe energy deficit, but humans with overweight or obesity, and then try to figure out what is going to happen with the muscle adaptation to all those hormonal changes that I have described. So then we went to Östersund, and in collaboration with Jose Homberg and our university, we put together the study. The study was done in September, and the subjects were doing the exercise but walking nearby the lab. Our aim was to achieve an energy deficit of 5,400 kilocalories. But we are going to be working with overweight and obese subjects. And this amount of energy deficit is the same, more or less, than a triathlete is going to have during an Ironman. So we want overweight or obese subjects to do the equivalent to 4 Ironmans in a row in energy terms. So that means that the exercise should be easy. So we decided to use walking at a pace of 4.5 kilometers per hour with some resting in between the walking. And we recruited volunteers, 15 males, 27 to 54 years of age, year to max 39. And we divided the subjects into groups. One group, 7 subjects, they were fed during 4 days with only 0.8 grams of sucrose per day. And the other 8 subjects, they received 0.8 grams of whey protein per day. This was the only food. The rest was water ad libitum. And the subjects came to the lab for the start of the experiment. And 1 week before the prolonged exercise, we did blood sampling, we did a DEXA bioimpedance to measure body water we measure resting metabolic rate, VO2 max, the cost of walking, and then subjects did incremental arm exercise to exhaustion with one arm, and we measured VO2 peak of this arm. And then they repeated the same with the other arm. And when they were done with this, they did incremental exercise to exhaustion with both legs. So we had whole body VO2 max too. And before doing all this testing, they got a muscle biopsy from the deltoid of one arm, the deltoid of the other arm, and one of the vastus lateralis. And then during the next 7 days, we measured the physical activity and the diet. At the 7th day, they came to the lab under fasting conditions. We got a blood sample, and then they performed the first day of intervention. They started with 45 minutes of one arm cranking. The arm was assigned randomly. The other arm didn't do any exercise, was the control arm. And the exercising arm was exercising at 15% of the maximal exercise intensity. And then they did 8 hours walking. And what is important to highlight is that before starting the walking phase, they had the food, the 320 kilocalories, but they had only 1/3. And we were giving them a bottle. We were telling them, this is your breakfast. So they had it, 1/3 of the 320 kilocalories. That means 100 kilocalories breakfast. At lunchtime, they got another half a liter of drink with the other third. And at 8 in the afternoon, they got the last drink. And they were allowed to drink ad libitum, as much they needed during the day. They did this for 4 days. So the 5th day in the morning, they show up in the lab. They got muscle biopsies in both deltoids and the vastus lateralis. We perform all those tests again. And then during the next 3 days, they were living in an apartment that we rented for them, and they were having the food that we were providing to them. So we had a very accurate assessment of the amount of food they were having, and they had an isoenergetic food every day. So they should be in energy balance during these 3 days. And after the 3 days of control energy balance, they came back to the lab, and they got again muscle biopsies from the 3 muscles. This is the one-arm cranking exercise, and some of the subjects walking in the forest around the lab. What happened with the intervention? Body composition and hormonal changes. Of course, body weight was reduced, 5.2 kilos, after the 4 days of prolonged exercise with energy restriction. And then they recover a little bit during the 3 days of isoenergetic diet. And this is an assessment performed 1 month later. And here we have fat mass. Fat mass was reduced by 2.1 kilograms in 4 days. And then from after the last day of walking and to the 3rd day of the control diet, they lost 700 grams of fat. We don't know why, but they did. And when they came back, they were weighing 1 kilo fat less than at the beginning. But this was curiosity. We just wanted to know what, because we told them, we are done with the study after the diet phase. So you do what you want, what do you want with your life? But they wanted to get rid of some fat, and they did some exercise by their own. But this was only curiosity we had to see what was the impact of the intervention on the subjects. Hormones. Cortisol was increased, almost significant, but didn't achieve significant, but we think it was increased. And testosterone was reduced as expected. Insulin was reduced as expected. and leptin was very much reduced, as expected. And leptin was recovering the levels despite fat was going down during this phase. So they were developing leptin resistance already at the end of the intervention. Free fatty acids were very much increased during the phase of prolonged exercise, and this may have contributed also to the insulin resistance. And our subjects, they had sucrose or whey protein, and as a consequence, the brain chain amino acids, they were much increased in the group that had whey protein, so they had much more essential amino acids in the circulation than brain chain amino acids, that they should be able to stimulate protein synthesis. But brain chain amino acid was also increased in the group that only had sucrose, probably because of proteolysis to maintain gluconeogenesis in the liver. What happened with the muscle mass? They lost muscle mass. They lost, after the third day of isoenergetic diet, the muscle mass was 0.5 kilo less than at the beginning of the intervention. So this muscle mass was lost, the proportion of muscle mass that was lost was higher in the control arm than in the train arm, than in the legs. So the exercise attenuated the loss of muscle mass. And this attenuation was much larger in the legs than in the arm that did some exercise. So then we wanted to ask how. What were the mechanisms for this? So I will start presenting some data about the microarray that we did. We did a microarray in the 3 muscles, and then we look at the genes that were changed. There was, of course, many genes that were changed, but I cannot talk about every gene. I will only talk about a few things. That one, NNMT, was the one that was changed in a great amount. This is nicotinamide methyltransferase. And it was increased the gene expression in the control arm and in the exercise arm, and also in the leg. But in the leg, the effect was much less than in the train arm and than in the control arm. So then we look also at this other one, PTK4. PTK4 is a kinase that blocks pyruvate dehydrogenase and facilitates lipid oxidation. So that one was increased very much in the exercise, in the non-exercise arm, in the control arm. No change we didn't detect this into the more responding genes in the train arm, and it was also increased, but not as much in the leg. So we look at the protein levels of this gene, so the NMT protein level. And the NMT protein level was increased very much in the control arm and the train arm, but much less in the legs. So the exercise blunted the NMT response in the vastus lateralis. The circulating levels of methylnicotinamide, that is the product of the enzyme, this enzyme is NNMT, is catalyzing the methylation of nicotinamide and is reducing the levels of nicotinamide. Nicotinamide is necessary to produce NADH, and NADH is necessary for the sirtuins. So what is happening here is that you have increased levels of methylnicotinamide during the energy deprivation. And then we decided to look at what regulates the expression of NNMT. And it turned out that in the literature it says that STAT3 upregulates the expression of NNMT. So we look at the STAT3 in the muscle, and actually, as expected, STAT3 phosphorylation response was planted in the leg by the high level of exercise. So So this reduction in STAT3 phosphorylation may contribute to save muscle mass because STAT3 phosphorylation has been linked to cachexia in cancer models. And our subjects, they had, some of them, they had amino acids in the drink. So, and we look at the effect in muscle protein synthesis to see if the attenuation of of the loss of muscle mass by exercise in the legs could be linked to the drink. But there was no differences almost between the subjects having only sucrose or only whey protein. But protein synthesis was not stimulated by the administration of amino acids in our model. And the reason why it was not stimulated is because glycogen synthase kinase beta should be phosphorylated to allow protein synthesis to occur. And actually, what we saw is that the level of phosphorylation of this enzyme was reduced, and it was not increased by the administration of protein, and as a consequence, protein synthesis could not be stimulated. So then, if protein synthesis was not increased, then what explains the differences in muscle mass between the different muscles studied should be the level of protein degradation. So then, protein degradation may occur through these three pathways in the muscle, especially ubiquitin proteasome and autophagy. The ubiquitin proteasome was, FOXOs were inhibited, were not activated in our experimental model. So then we focus on autophagy, and what we saw is the autophagy is blunted in the legs. Backclean phosphorylation is needed to allow autophagy to occur. So, and it was blunted in the legs. So then we look at NF-kappa beta because NF-kappa beta has been linked to protein degradation. And NF-kappa beta in the muscle can be activated by external signals, cytokines, for example, or it can be activated by ROS or metabolic factors. And the activation on F-kappa beta, what it's going to do is that it will trigger the expression of, for example, antioxidant enzymes. And also, those antioxidant enzymes may have an influence on protein degradation. So then we look at the precursor of N-kappa beta, NFP105, and their response was reduced in the leg. And also the same happened with P50, that is one of F-kappa beta factors that binds in the nucleus. It was also blunted in the legs. So then it means that part of our findings could be due to the blunting of the NF-kappa beta response. So this is the expected accumulation of keto acids with fasting from Cahill studies. The sucrose group, this is the expected level for 4 days of fasting. What happened in our intervention? So the sucrose group was here, a little bit less than expected for full fasting. They had sucrose. And the whey protein group was on target, according to Cahill. The increase of keto acids may cause oxidative stress that is sensed by NRF2, and this causes a response mediated by NRF2 that increases antioxidant enzymes, and they should contribute to balance the situation. And NRF2 is also inducing antioxidant enzymes. So we look at NRF2, and the response of NRF2 was also blunted in the legs. So we look at catalase, an enzyme that is regulated by NRF2. And catalase was increased in the arm muscles, but not in the legs. Muscle fat oxidation capacity was increased, more in the legs than in the arms. And this was linked to an overexpression of leptin receptors that was more marked in the arms than in the legs. The opposite that what happened with fat oxidation. And PDK4 response was more marked in the arms than in the legs. What happened with performance? So performance was reduced during whole body exercise. VO2 max was reduced by 15%. Something expected. They should be very tired, not eating, but not in the arm that trained. But it was reduced in the arm that didn't train. So we don't know if this reduction in VO2 max is due to central factors or peripheral factors. So conclusions, starvation elicits a very marked endocrine response that facilitates a catabolic response and inhibits the anabolic response. The intervention described is feasible to induce a fast reduction of fat mass. The exercise attenuates the loss of muscle mass by blunting of autophagy, NF-kappa beta signaling, and STAT3 signaling. Maximal fat oxidation capacity is increased and associated with a higher expression of leptin receptors, leptin signaling, and PDK4 in skeletal muscle. And starvation induces the expression of some antioxidant enzymes in skeletal muscle. And the skeletal muscle is refractory to the anabolic effects of proteins during a severe energy deficit, at least with the level of protein that we administer in our study. So that way of reducing your body fat works. And in Gran Canaria, we have excellent places where you can put this in practice. So my acknowledgement to all the people that contribute to those studies. Thank you.